Line's good.
Never on.
Whoa.
Hard. Hardly.
Come on, Brent.
Line's good.
Got real close.
I hear high, right?
Try and hit 2/3.
Have they saved it for her? Yes, they have.
Ooh, welcome to Game of Stones, everybody. I am Sean Graham Scott alongside, as always. Hello, Scott.
Sean, it's been quite a 4-year journey for us, for the players, for the fans out there. You know, we said it before the event. This is why we lift all those weights.
That's right.
We've made it, Sean, through a quadrennial, not only, as fans, but we've been doing the podcast now for 4 years.
Yeah, just over 4 years. We started the 2018 Scotties Tournament of Hearts. It was our first episode that we previewed and went all the way through those Olympics in Pyeongchang. And now we've gone through the Olympics in Beijing. We've seen it all, Scott. The highs, the lows, the monotony of times of the curling schedule. But it's been quite a journey. And we've been there every step of the way. Well, not every step of the way. A lot of the steps of the way we've been there.
Yeah. It's pretty crazy to think, we just thought, hey, we like talking about curling.
Yeah.
Why not talk about it into microphones and see if anybody else wants to join the conversation? And it's been a lot of fun. Sean, do we have any word yet on whether our team will stick together for the next quadrennial? Do we have from the authorities?
We're exploring all our options. There's discussions going on across the curling community. We got to see what other teams might break up and what opportunities might present themselves, Scott. So I think it might still be a little too early to make any definitive comment on that.
Fair enough.
We'll pull a Gushue and be like, hey, we'll play.
We'll see what happens.
Let's see what happens. Whatever. We'll get to that situation a little bit later. But yeah, it'll be a interesting spring summer talking about who will break up, who won't break up. I think the latter is going to be a lot shorter than the former list there, and that apparently includes a couple podcast duos that I've heard of, Scott. And by a couple, I mean one has hinted at potentially retiring from the podcast game, but I don't know. There's been more entries into it since we started, and it's been a lot of fun. It's a fun community to be a part of.
Absolutely. It's really nice. All the interaction we get on social media too is pretty fun. I'll admit Sean does most of it. I step in from time to time, but no, I still get the notifications on my phone. Interact with everybody. It's a lot of fun. So for what it's worth, I'll be here.
There you go. Okay. And Scott, we did. I'll tell you the specifics of it offline, but did get a bit of a milestone on social media this week. I was kind of excited about for about 20 minutes, and then it went away, and then it came back, and so exciting things are going on. Partly because the Olympic Games were going on in Beijing. It is all wrapped up. The closing ceremony is done as we are speaking here, late Monday afternoon Eastern time in North America. A lot of the folks are on their way home. I saw Wayne Maddaw tweeted that he had made it to Hong Kong and was about to get on a flight that is departing Tuesday in Hong Kong, landing Monday in Toronto. One of those weird world things that you get when you fly from Asia back to North America, where you lose a day going, you get it back on the way back into North America. So he's there. Price Atkinson, he was tweeting from the plane, the charter, I guess, that the U.S. Olympic team got. They got those service. He said they were flying somewhere over Russia, and he was tweeting about just reflecting on the experience of being there. He did a great job with the USA social media team over there. So yeah, so people are starting to come back. Mike Harris is leaving. He's going to the Swiss Women's Championship, which is happening now, as is the Scottish Championship. So there's still a lot going on in the world of curling, Scott, but we thought it'd be good to put a bit of a bow on Beijing 2022 on the Olympic side. Of course, we still have Beijing 2022 Paralympics to look forward to, which I'm very excited about for the Canadian side, as they will try to I don't know if get revenge is the right way to put it, but certainly controversy in 2018 in their game against Team China. And it's so they'll be looking to get that gold medal that they had a good chance of in 2018. So we still have some things to look forward to in Beijing 2022. But in terms of the Olympics, Scott, and the curling in particular, what is your initial takeaway from the 2.5 weeks of action that we had from the Ice Cube?
I think what we thought going in was sort of what we got, right? The women's field, very deep, very strong. We got them sort of beating up on each other, but in the end, the championships final was probably not what we expected, but not something out of total left field.
Mm-hmm.
On the men's side, we talked about there being a clear 3 and a drop off after that. And that's what we saw manifest in the medal podium.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of, yeah, what we thought going in happened. There were, some interesting results or interesting points, but not a lot of huge surprises.
Yeah, I agree. There was nothing that really stood out on the 4-person side, a little bit on the mixed doubles side. And we can talk about that because we really haven't done a full breakdown of the mixed doubles on the show. But Scott, let's start with what we just saw. We'll go in reverse chronologic order here. The last game of the Olympic Games was that final between Great Britain and Japan on the women's side. Eve Muirhead really dominated that game from start to finish, I thought, Scott. Mm-hmm. There was no point in that game where Satsuke Fujisawa and her squad were pushing the play. Eve Muirhead, from the start to the finish, she controlled every end. She was never chasing. They were just so precise throughout the course of the game. That was really just clinical precision from the first rock to the last rock for Team GB. And really, there's nothing that Fujisawa could have done. She wasn't great. She was heavy on a few shots herself, a couple opportunities to score. She had a chance at a multiple. I believe it was the 6th end, and was heavy with her last. But I don't know, Scott, just clinical from Eve.
Oh, yeah, big time. They weren't missing anything, and this would be the kind of game that would be very frustrating to be the opponent, right? Sean, you and we played in a game at the Ottawa Club where the opponents didn't seem to miss anything. Mm-hmm. And then when they did, we would miss a shot, and we couldn't take advantage of their very few misses. And that was extremely frustrating as a player to be like, come on, can't we do anything? Like, they're making everything perfect. It was just, you said clinical. I think that's the right word for it. It was awesome to see Eve and her team. For Eve Muirhead, her 4th Olympic Games. This might be the culmination of the career. Maybe not. Who knows? But what a way to go out. You just had to feel really great for that team, watching them, celebrate that victory.
Yeah, no question. Very exciting. Eve, of course, has had those health setbacks. She's had surgery on both of her legs and hips. She's not old, Scott. She's younger than both of us. Yes. And yet it feels like she's been around forever, because this was her 4th time at the Olympic Games. And she does get that breakthrough. And it will be curious to see what women's Scottish curling looks like moving forward, and whether that means that Eve wants to take on another cycle or not. She certainly has other opportunities, as we know, professional opportunities there in Scotland, that maybe she wants to take a step back from the curling side. I don't know. But it was very cool to see. There was a video too that they posted. Rona Martin greeted her afterwards as well. So sort of the changing of the guard of the Great Britain women's gold medalist. It was a very cool moment to have Rona there 20 years after she won her gold medal in Salt Lake City. So congratulations to Eve Muirhead and her team. And also congratulations to Satsuke Fujisawa and her team for the silver medal, best ever finish for Japan at an Olympic Games. Scott, they were going into this, I think, one of those teams that we had maybe in the bottom half of the field in terms of expectations. But what we said in the show is that, yeah, they could certainly make the playoffs, as I think 9 teams, or at least 8 teams in the field could have. Mm-hmm. But what did you see from them? Because when you look at some of the peripherals, they were -3 on scoring over the course of the week. Great Britain, not coincidentally perhaps, was the best at +24. But they were minus on the scoring. Their force efficiency wasn't particularly good. Their last stone efficiency was a little lower than where you might want to see it for a top level team. It was comparable with some of the other teams, but I don't know, like the peripheral numbers, I'm looking at them, Scott, nothing stands out for me. So how did they do this? And what does this mean potentially for curling in Japan, do we think?
Well, they sort of did it. Eve Muirhead's team also finished 5-4 in the round robin, along with Japan. So maybe a bit unexpected that those were the two that would come together in that final. But Team Japan did it by beating the right teams to get there. She took care of Canada when she had the opportunity, was able to get those wins at the start, and then as her team and her kind of faded a bit by the end of the week. It's a long competition, as we all know. They had enough in the bank already to be able to withstand the onslaught from those charging teams at the end of the week, like Team Canada and Jennifer Jones. So that, to my mind, was how they got there. They beat who they were supposed to and banked that win against Canada.
And kind of crazy too when you look at some of the numbers. So Japan was the first ranked team in terms of percentage of the course of the week. They didn't have a game under 80%, but Fujisawa herself was the first skip. Like she had the best shooting percentage of the skips. Where at the third and the second position, they were fifth, so middle of the pack. So you'll and first at the lead position. But if you're looking at this, it's really Fujisawa herself over the course of the week was carrying the team and making up for some deficiencies earlier in the lineup relative to the rest of the field. So she's coming in, throwing in less advantageous positions over the course of the week, making those big shots, keeping them in games. So great week for her personally. Also, somewhat curiously too, Scott, Great Britain and Japan, 8th and 9th, respectively, in the draw shot challenge. And when we're looking at a potential tiebreak of 4 teams at the end of the week, that it's the 8th, 9th, and 10th team in draw shot challenge that are coming together. So I just look at this as, we've always known Fujisawa is a great player. They didn't quite put it together throughout the course of the week the way that we've seen them do it in the past. They come through with 2 amazing games in the playoffs, put themselves in position. Well, an amazing game in the semifinal, little off in the final, but they kept up with Eve. It wasn't a blowout until Eve cracked that 4 there in the 8th end. So full credit to Team Japan and Fujisawa. They're a lot of fun. And I tweeted that after the game that they're in tears. They're obviously disappointed, upset they didn't win, but they didn't stop smiling, man. They were still out there having a good time. I think in the disappointment, they recognized immediately the achievement of a silver medal, what that meant, and how hard they had worked to get to that point. So it was very cool to see them up on that podium.
Yeah, for sure. I'm just looking at who they lost to. So they lost to Great Britain, Sweden, Switzerland, the other playoff teams, and they lost to Korea as well. So they, like I said before, beat who they were supposed to beat for the most part, and weren't as good against that top tier competition. Going back to what you were saying about the draw shot challenge, it's sort of strange for the team that was number 1 in shooting percentage all week to end up, what is it, 9th in draw shot challenge, because you think, oh, well, if they're making the shots during the games, why not the draw shot challenge as well? It's like the same shot. It should be easier in theory, right?
Mm-hmm. It should be, but apparently not.
Yeah, apparently not. There you go. So great job by their team. They were the bronze medalists 4 years ago. They upped their standing by 1 to become the silver medalist this year. Will we see them again in 4 years? I'm not sure. It's tough for any team to go 2 cycles, let alone 3.
Yeah.
But they're a lot of fun to watch as always. They look like they were having fun and not letting the pressure of the moment get to them too much.
Yeah, and there's a competition in Japan too. You got Team Yoshimura there. They've played at the high level. They were there at the Japanese championship for the Olympic qualifier in the summer, early fall. So it's not like they have just this unimpeded path to get back if they want to keep going. So that's another factor too. They could keep playing the next quad and not qualify out of Japan. There is the depth there that somebody can challenge them. So it's not a given if they want to go. So Scott, let's talk about the semifinals too. because they were kind of crazy. You get Japan beats Switzerland 8-6, and Great Britain beats Sweden 12-11. And I looked up at one point, and I was like, "Oh, Suzanne Burt got there. When did she get to? To Beijing?"
Yeah.
But yeah, kind of crazy that game. Big scores all over the place between Eve Muirhead and Anna Hasselborg. 11-8 going to the 10th end. Sweden cracks the 3, and then Eve is able to get the 2 ticks in the 11th end, and the 11th end, frankly, wasn't that exciting, but what a game, Scott. Like that's a game that you expect, like, all right, it's Tuesday morning at the Scotties or the Briar. People aren't quite awake yet, and like, oh, look at all these points. You don't expect that in the Olympic semifinal.
No, and that was Friday, Sean, right? So I had a doctor's appointment, and I turned it off after the 8th end, or the 9th end, after they went up 11-8. I was like, well, they're not gonna blow that. Go try to start to clear my car off because it snowed a bunch. And my friend Gord, he texted me and he goes, "Holy cow, great game! Sweden, Great Britain going to the extra." And I was like, "What?" So
Yeah.
and Gord likes curling, follows curling, but he's not usually, I would say, getting up to watch the morning draw of any particular curling event. So yeah, this was a great game that captivated a lot of audiences. And it was like they gave up a 4 in the first end, second end, something like that.
I believe it was the second, yeah.
We'll talk about this more when we talk about the big ends, but usually if you give up a big end, you lose. That
Yeah.
against this caliber of competition, right? You'd prefer to do it in the early game, so you have a chance to build back, and that's what we saw. We saw not giving up, still going to shot by shot. They claw back with a 3, I believe, in the very next end, and then continue just chipping away, right?
Yeah.
Take 2, give them 1, and they did a great job of that in the second half of the game, limiting the scoring of the Swedish team,
Yeah.
while maximizing their own opportunities with the hammer.
Yeah, it was an absolute masterclass in how to rebound from the big score and how to manage the scoreboard through the rest of the game. So yeah, 4-3, and then they do give up another deuce, but they get the key forces and a big steal when they need it. And just for good measure, you crack a 4 of your own. So just, you don't expect Anna Hasselborg to lose after scoring 4 in the first end.
No.
But you also would say, if you're looking at it, well, Eve Muirhead scored a 3 and a 4 in the course of the game, so how could she lose too? Like, it's just things happen that you wouldn't expect to happen in that game, and it was a lot of fun to watch. And I'm very glad that I was able to watch that one live.
Yeah, and that 9th end in particular was pretty fun. Anna was trying to get the angles just right and was a little heavy on the last one to chip things like in exactly the wrong place. And as soon as it came to rest, I go, "Oh, that's there for 4." And the Eve and the team took a couple minutes to look it over, talk about it, and decided on the right shot and made it. So all credit there for that. Sean, do you want to switch to the other semifinal, Japan and Switzerland? This Swiss team is one that they were near the top all week in the standings, in the percentages. We spoke on our sort of halfway update last week about, they were a bit shaky in their first couple games, but sort of got the momentum going, remembered, oh, we're really good, and we're beating teams down. And then in this game, giving up that big 4 in the 5th end was a real dagger.
Yeah, not something that you typically expect to see out of Tirinzoni. And you look at the numbers for that game. Molina Pats is a little low in the semifinal, as is Silvana Tirinzoni, both throwing in the 70s, and that's just not what you expect from them. And so, yeah, when Japan cracks that big 4 there in the 5th, as you say, Scott, not really a lot of opportunity for them to come back, and really cemented in the 6th end when they get that steal. Japan does, and
that steal was probably like if that was the 4 was the dagger, the steal was the twisting of the knife for Team Japan there.
Yeah, I mean, Tiranzoni does come back with a 3 in the 7 to get it within a point, but it's so hard to come back. You're down late in the game. You don't have the hammer. Really tough to come back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So congratulations to the medalist. I didn't see any of the bronze medal games, Scott. Did you? It happened in the middle of the night.
Yeah, no, it was on too late or early for me, as it were. But
yes.
No surprise, really. Like, I'm sure it was a good game. Seeing Switzerland play against Sweden, I think, is what we all would have expected in the final.
Yeah.
And nonetheless, it's always a good matchup when those two come together.
Absolutely. So congratulations to Anna Hasselborg. She gets another medal at the Olympic Games with a bronze. Alina Pats really struggled in the bronze medal game, down at 64%. So your medalists, Great Britain, Japan, and Sweden. Silvana Tiranzoni gets 4th. Scott, let's talk about who finished in 5th real quick. That would be your team from Canada in Jennifer Jones. They lose out on Draw Shot Challenge. Finished 10th, lost out to the 8th and 9th place teams in Japan and Great Britain, as I mentioned, in what was a pretty crazy finish on the women's side. People were looking at the permutations overnight, like what could happen. It was this cool thing. I think, was it Thursday night Eastern time, or maybe it was Wednesday night Eastern time? We saw them play, and then overnight people were trying to figure out what would happen. We wake up in the morning, again Eastern time, and they go out and they play their last game against Denmark, win it, and then sit around for a while as the scenarios were in their favor going into it. The majority of the outcomes would have led to Canada being in the playoffs, but they hit on a scenario in which they didn't make the playoffs and they were left out. But Scott, I liked Jennifer Jones. I thought it was cool the moment that she had with Satsuke Fujisawa in the mix zone, congratulating them on making the playoffs. I saw some of her interviews afterwards, just how appreciative and grateful she is to be back, or was to be back at the Olympic Games at this point in her career. And I don't think there's any shame in not making the playoffs. I think they didn't play as well as they could have, certainly. And I was surprised that Caitlin Lodge struggled as much as she did over points of the week. But overall, I think 5-4 is a solid performance for this team, given that the gold medalist had the exact same record.
Yeah, they had the exact same record, Sean, but like, there's the one turning point for them all week was their epic collapse in the loss to Team China. I looked at all the data from this event.
Yeah.
One other team lost after giving up a 4 between the men's and the women's. Nobody lost after you gave up a 5.
Okay.
In curling generally, or after they scored a 5, rather.
Yeah.
If you score 5 points in an end, you should win that game.
Yes, you should.
And if you're looking for any blame to go around in that, it's that back half, how they managed the back half of that game. It was floating the outturn on a hit to score 1 and go up 2, where they ended up tied instead, giving up a steal. It just can't happen. So I think there's like a little bit of blame to go to the team for how they played that game and how they finished that game. It might have been a case where Han Yu was not playing. I'm not sure why. I never saw.
I think they just made the lineup change. They didn't like what was going on. They made a lineup change.
So maybe you think, come into that game thinking, oh, this one will be easy. We don't have to go as hard. I believe it was a morning in Beijing as well.
I think so.
But just, I know that China had a good week. They beat Sweden, but once you score a 5-ender in the 6th end of a game, you can't let that team come back and beat you. And that's the reason they missed the playoffs.
Yes, that is the game that, you win that, you are in the playoffs, obviously, but they didn't. And it was a poorly played last half of the game. I mean, don't forget too, Scott, that they had a chance in the extra, that you just had a pretty bad miss by Jennifer Jones in the extra to win that game. So it wasn't just a case of the last half of the game. Jennifer Jones still had a shot to win and she missed it. So it just it wasn't there for her. But Jennifer Jones wasn't great over the course of the week. And we talked about this going in to the week as to what can we expect from Jennifer Jones and the team. Overall, 6th in shooting percentage for the week, but Jennifer Jones was down in 8th place amongst the skips, down at 74.4%. And if you look at the numbers, she had that inconsistency that we saw during the trials, where she had this stretch of good games, but then a stretch of bad games too. And that we said it before, that's not sustainable. You're not going to win like that. And they did not win like that. So I don't know, Scott, what what this says about larger issues in Canadian curling. There's certainly been a lot of chatter about it, but I'm not upset that they went. I think it was fun that Jennifer Jones got to go back. I would be surprised if this team stays together moving forward, but they didn't. Like the stuff that you see on social media sometimes, and I know social media is where like decency goes to die, but they're not an embarrassment to the country. Like, what are we talking about here? They went 5-4 at the deepest field in the Olympic history and lost out on draw shot challenge.
Yeah. And I'm saying that loss was bad and could be pinned on them. Some of their other ones weren't bad losses. They probably won some games they could have lost, but
yeah,
but that's the moment that I point to there. And maybe something, Sean, is that maybe these Canadian curlers have gotten a little too used to perfect ice conditions. We saw in 2018, Rachel Homan's team struggled when the ice was a little bit tricky. Same thing here, that it seemed like the players were not adapting to the ice conditions as quickly as possible and sort of just thinking that they can make any shot regardless of the conditions. We saw a curl of about 4 feet on this ice at the Olympics. Usually in the slams, we're seeing 5 feet, sometimes up to 6 feet of curl. So maybe that's something that we need to look at for our major competitions here in Canada. A lot of curl is good and players really like it because they can make any shot. But the way that it is, or that we saw at the Olympics rather, it made the guards actually like meaningful.
Yeah.
Which I kind of like, right? If you can nose hit something behind a center guard that's 2 feet above the house, and you nose hit something top 4, then what are we even doing here?
Yeah, then it's kind of meaningless. The guards are useless. And I think that helped account for some of the bigger scores, is that you couldn't get at as many stones in the house because guards were meaningful. And I agree. I think the 4 foot, maybe 3.5, 4 feet of curl is the correct amount for max excitement, that you can draw around stuff, but it's not so much that the guards are meaningless. And this is something that I think we've talked about on the show before, is what the slam should do, right? You know, like in tennis, each surface has its own tendencies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hard court is really fast, so the big servers do really well on the hard court. Grass is a little slower, and then on the clay, it's the really athletic people who can get side to side and slide around and do crazy stuff. That's the key to playing on the clay court. And I'm sure I'm oversimplifying it, but in Canada, as you say, like maybe we should set it up so that different events have different ice conditions. Like you have an event that is known for being a little slower and a little straighter, and then you have like at the Briar and the Scotties where the ice is super quick and a lot of curl, and it forces the players to adjust more. And I think when you look at some of the international teams, they're used to playing on different types of ice conditions. They'll come to Canada, they'll play in slams, they'll get used to that type of the ice with the 6 feet really fast, and you can get to anything. But then they'll go play in events at home, national championships, smaller cash type spiels, that because I'm always amazed when I look at the team schedules on Curling Zone and stuff, that the international teams don't always play in Canada. They play at home a lot. And those events won't have the same conditions. They might be straighter, they might be slower, they will not have the same ice conditions. And since Canadian teams don't travel internationally as much as international teams traveling to Canada to play. Maybe those teams, as you say, are just more adept and more used to changing ice conditions and can adjust better than the Canadian teams can.
I think that's a very valid hypothesis that we've laid out here. Whether it's true or not, tell us. I'd love to hear from some of the teams how they feel about different ice conditions. That said, they didn't shame our country. They did their best. Jennifer Jones isn't. I don't want to say she's old, but she's old for curling. And
I think wasn't she the oldest women's
athlete at the games?
Or
I
at the
think
Canadian
so.
one? No, there was some skier from somewhere. It was like almost 50 or something. I know Jennifer Jones is almost 52,
but I mean, she's a great player. She's the greatest of all time.
Yeah,
no shame in that for sure.
No,
and
if we show up next year and she wins the Scotties, no one's going to be like, what? Like crazy.
Yeah.
Like,
no. And she's got that in her. It's just like, it seems like she's got fewer amazing games in her now than she did before. But when she hits those heights, it's still just as good.
Yeah. I think it's a case where like maybe she has a better chance at slams than at like a Scotties or something. The shorter events is where she might get on that run for a week or something. Whereas, Scotties is going to, those longer events, maybe not as much, where we've seen that fluctuation in shooting for her. So that's the Canadian story. Any other stories on the women's side, Scott, that really stand out to you? Alina Kovaleva, obviously with the tough week, they only get one win for the Russian side. I was also kind of surprised, I guess, a little bit by the week that we saw out of the Americans. Competitive, certainly, through the whole week. I didn't think it would be as competitive as they were. I was a little more down on them than you were coming into the week. A tough week for Korea. They had a chance going into that last draw in their last game, but they fall to 4-5 on the week. And Denmark and Madeline Dupont, they get 2 wins at this year's Olympics. An improvement, doubles her win total from 2018. Scott, and I'm going to call it right now, if she wants to, if she chooses to play, she'll be back in 2026. She'll make it again.
Okay, that's insane. But
that's what you said. That's what you said last year when I said that she would make it in 2022.
And I said that in 2018?
Probably.
I don't remember what I say. So
I always bet on Madeline Dupont to get there. You tell me I'm crazy, and then she gets there.
Okay, fair enough.
You just crap all over the Danish teams. You really you're not going to be welcome in Denmark at any point.
No, I've never been.
Now you can't go.
Got to invite me over.
Well, it'd be nice to Madeline Dupont. Maybe she'll have you over. Take you to dinner.
Maybe.
So anything else though, Scott, on the women's side that stands out?
I don't think so. I think we've talked it all through. Great job for Great Britain. Disappointing end for Switzerland, and a good improvement for Team Japan.
All right, let's talk about the men's side, and it is the culmination of a career for Niklas Edin. He gets his gold medal to round out what he needed for his, trophy shelf, and he gets the gold medal over Bruce Mouat, winning in the final. I don't know, Scott. I did not watch this game in real time because it was a middle of the night situation here in North America, but I did watch it afterwards. So I knew the result in watching the replay of the game. It was an extra end game, but I didn't think it was the greatest of games. Mouat starts with the hammer, gets forced, Nick Edin cracks his 2, then steals. And then for the rest of the game, it really felt like Nick Edin was in charge. He gets the blanks in 5 and 6. You do get that steal in 7, but I don't know, Scott. It never felt to me like they were threatened. In the 10th end, Mouat did have a chance, 2 runbacks for Nick Edin to force the single to get into the extra end. But neither of those shots were, for someone of Nick Edin's caliber, that difficult. So, it wasn't a bad game. It was kind of like the women's game where it felt the whole way like one team was controlling the play, in charge of the pace of the game. We just didn't see the score get out of hand the same way we saw on the women's side. But I got a very similar feeling in watching that game. But what was your take?
Uh, so I wasn't able to watch it live either. It seems to me like both of these teams respected a lot each other's abilities and weren't really willing to take huge risks to go for a big multiple, knowing that, hey, if this doesn't work out, we're going to give up a big steal.
Right.
Would that be a fair characterization?
Yeah, there's a lot of cautious shot calling here, and part of that is because they are so good at the run backs, and
Yeah.
it's very difficult, even with, as we talked about, where okay, you can't throw and have the shooter make contact with one that's fully buried. They're so good at run backs, even from 10, 12, 15 feet, that it's really hard to generate multiples, which is why we only saw one over the course of the game. But it felt like nobody really wanted to take that chance until the later ends. And even at that, Bruce Mouat waits till the 10th, and he had a chance. Niklas Edin had to make two, and he did. But at no point did it ever really feel like there was that much pressure on the Swedes.
Yeah. And we maybe we'll talk another time about the tick rule, but it is true that these teams are so good that in the extra end, it just favors the team with the hammer so much. If you can make even one of the ticks, and then the ability that these guys have to make double peels and throw run backs. So for Team Mouat going in that extra end without hammer, I'm sure that they wanted that too. In the 10th.
They pushed hard for it,
and
they
pushed
really
for it because they kind of know, hey, if we only get our one here, we're probably not going to win.
When you look at that 10th end, I was amazed too. So Bruce Mouat, Niklas Edin just makes two run backs. He has to make a draw to at least full 8 foot, maybe touch the 4 foot to put it into an extra end, and he puts it on the pin. And that's really got to be really hard to do. Like you're disappointed. You thought you might have made it or had a chance for the 2 for the win, and you got to recompose yourself and make that shot. If I was in that position, either the stone is in the stand somewhere or it's hogged, and not hogged on the far hog line. I'm like letting it go and so scared to even let it go that it's hogging at the end I'm throwing it at, that it doesn't cross that hog line. Like I would be so terrified to throw that. So full credit to him. And then in the extra end, I think this also contributed to why I felt it was somewhat anticlimactic in the extra end, is that Niklas Edin does put some pressure on, and Bruce Mouat is forced into a very difficult shot on his last to try to sit one. He almost gets the angle right. I think it just goes over the top of the Swedish stone in the 4 foot on his angle run shot that he tried. And so Niklas Edin doesn't have to throw his last.
Yeah.
And that's that, so we don't have that moment in either game really where this is the shot to win the game. I mean, Eve Muirhead shot for 4 wins the game, but doesn't end the game. And in the men's game, we have the game end on the team that loses throwing. So it's kind of disappointing. So the extra end was a little more interesting than a typical extra end because there was a few more rocks in play. And Bruce Mouat, if he makes that shot, Niklas Edin's forced into something very difficult, but he missed it, and game over.
Yeah. It's always disappointing when it ends on a miss rather than a make.
Yeah.
So a little too bad for that, but bigger picture, Niklas Edin was only missing that gold medal from an Olympic Games. He's got it now. He's won everything there is to win. Sean, do we see him hang up his curling shoes?
I don't know. It depends on what the funding situation is in Sweden is, I think, and how much money they'll get for that gold medal and what the incentive is for them to keep going. Certainly, if they want to keep playing and the finances make sense for them, then sure. But do real life situations start to play into it? Do they want to be at home more? Do they not want to have to spend as much time in Canada? I know a couple of them have talked about relationships that you want to be home more as you get a little older, perhaps. So I'll be curious to see whether or not they want to keep playing, and it really is all 4 of them, frankly. And or maybe does Oscar say, I'll just do the mixed doubles thing and focus on that. It's a little less of a time commitment, perhaps, and maybe less time in North America. And maybe Nick Edin just says, yeah, I'm good, I'm done. But the reality is that if you're Swedish curling, you might want to make it worth their while to keep going if you're trying to grow the sport. I'd be curious to talk to somebody in Sweden, and maybe Jonathan and Ryan will do this because this is really their forte. But could Nick Edin, does the gold medal move the needle in Sweden in a way that the world championships don't? And the world championship titles don't. Now that there's a gold medal there, can he do kind of what Schuster did in the United States a little bit and get more people out, get some excitement? Does the Olympics carry that cachet in Sweden? And if that's the case, that you can grow the sport even further at the grassroots level from the gold medal, then it's really an incentive for the Swedish Curling Federation to keep them going for at least another couple of years. And the other reality is too, that who are you going to send? Like, we have a world championship in Vegas in a couple months. If I'm Nick Edin, I'm not playing in that. I'm done. I'm going to rest on my laurels. I might go to Vegas. I might have a good time, but I'm not playing in that event if I'm Nick Edin. But so who do they send, right? They obviously have junior teams who have gone to world championships before, but that's going to be I think an interesting discussion of, if they're gone, then the men's game internationally, it's really Bruce Mouat's.
Yeah. I think we see Oscar as the heir apparent to the Niklas Edin skipping a Team Sweden, right? We saw Edin's old team all leave and get replaced with this new younger team. I think we'll see that eventually too, that Oscar will go on to skip, bring in some younger players, maybe keep one or two of the guys that he plays with now, and make their run for it after this. But I don't see any reason why Niklas Edin would play next year, unless, as you say, that financial incentive is there from the government. But any way you look at it, one of the greats of all time, maybe the greatest that we've seen. So many world championships, European championships, and now it's capped off with that Olympic gold medal. So that would be my prediction, that we don't see him next year.
I think certainly he's wrapped up the greatest non-Canadian men's player of all time. I think it's pretty safe to say that the two best international players of all time are Swedes now, that you have Annette Nordberg and you have Nick Edin. And I don't think there's much debate there in terms of non-Canadians. And then if you want to throw in Canadians to the discussion, then you look at, where does Annette Nordberg stack up with Jennifer Jones? Where does Nick Edin stack up with Kevin Martin? And that's kind of the discussion, really. There's not a lot better, you gotta say. And out of a country that, it's remarkable too, that Sweden keeps just churning out these great players, but from all accounts, there's not a lot of grassroots there. There's not a lot of just general interest in it. But they find these people and they come out and just dominate the game for a decade at a time.
Yeah, it's pretty cool that they can still do that and care enough about the game to develop one team. Like we saw, maybe Norwegian women is an example of what happens when a great player like Dorte Nordby retires, and then the women's game in Norway sort of falls off a cliff, and we don't see them at world championships anymore.
So let's talk about the bronze medal winner. That's Brad Gushue and his team from St. John's. They beat John Schuster in the bronze medal game, another game that I did not watch in real time because it was, again, in the middle of the night here in North America. Watched the replay of it, and a great game for Gushue, maybe the most relaxed medal game in the history of the Olympics in any sport. Both teams were pretty chilled out there. You got two teams that at least the back ends of, or no, not even the back ends. Out of the 8 players on the ice, 5 already have gold medals in their pockets. So not as important to win one here. They obviously wanted to, but it was overall, I think, a pretty relaxed game. And Brad Gushue gets the win. So congratulations to them. Gallant and Walker get their first Olympic medals. So very exciting for them. And you saw the emotion after the semifinal loss and a little bit after the bronze medal game of Brad Gushue. think it's pretty clear that this team is that's it for this team. It's also pretty clear that Curling Canada is allowing them to play in the Brier, I think, as a favor for all the work that they've done, the effort that they've put into it, and it's really going to be a victory lap for those guys at the Brier. But you just saw it, like when you see Brad Gushue, who's not an outwardly emotional guy. It was interesting in his interview that he talked about, he is actually kind of an emotional guy in real life, but you don't really get a sense of that when you're watching him play. As he comes around the corner, that very powerful moment, he sees his family on the screen and he just breaks down, falls to his knees, and Nichols is there too. That's where you just get the sense of like, this is it. And he knows that this is it. I think his family knows that this is it. And that moment, that culmination of that very famous list that he had as a kid, that he's checked everything off that list, and that's that. So just a very powerful moment from Brad Gushue and the whole team. And I think it was cool to see them on the podium. As we said going into it, top three, very clear in this field. It'd be cool if they were the podium teams. They were the podium teams. So I think it's a fair result. And if we look at the Olympics as the culmination of a quad, these are the best three teams from this quad on the men's side.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else would have been an upset for sure. Team Schuster played really, really well this week. I kind of dunked on them a bit on our preview, saying that they wouldn't do well. Sean, they were the best team throughout the week in terms of the hammer factor, which is hammer efficiency plus steal defense. They were at 0.76, which is like crazy. I mean, this is a real small sample, so
sure,
you're going to get higher values on that, but just crazy. Brad Gushue was second, 0.72. So they had a really great week, but like you say, they were pretty relaxed out there playing that bronze medal game. Earlier in the tournament, we saw Brad and Brett butting heads a little bit. It's not something that we've seen before. Brett is usually the sort of second opinion on strategy, comes down, looks at the angles a lot. Mark tends to stay close to the hack when it's his turn to throw, and it's really Brad and Brett that have those discussions. We saw this week a little bit of what are you doing down here? Like, why don't you make your shots instead of talking to me about it? Brett Gallant wasn't as strong as he usually is. Still way better than either of us could do, like a great player, but he was just a little bit off. That semifinal game against Sweden, I really thought was anybody's game, and Canada just missed a couple of shots by like a little bit, like half an inch here and there. And Nichols wasn't as sharp as usual, and they only lost by a point. Like, this team is really good. They can hang with anybody. Even when they're struggling, they're still one of the best in the world. Top three finished on the podium. I agree with you. They're going to the Brier, I guess.
Yeah, they can't back out now. They've signed the contract.
So Brad seemed to be like, well, we'll see what happens. Who knows? But
he said they agreed to it before the Olympics, which he was like, yeah, of course we could do that. And then they played in the Olympics, and they're like, oh no.
And I was like, okay, can I go home first, guys? That'll be, like you say, the real swan song, take a bow, whatever it is, victory lap. I've always said before, though, Sean, Brad Gushue can win Newfoundland anytime he wants. If, he hangs him up for a year or two and says, oh, you know what? It'd be fun to go back to the Brier. Let me win Newfoundland. Hey, 3 guys who want to play with me, they'll win Newfoundland.
Yeah.
If he doesn't care not being super competitive at the Brier, he can still go. And I don't think we've seen the end of him. He's a business owner. His family's young, getting a bit older, wanting to spend more time at home with them. But this guy could do broadcasting pretty easily. I really wouldn't be surprised to see him in the booth at some point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Sportsnet has a seat warm for him whenever he wants it. He's been part of the broadcast before, after he's been eliminated at some events. And I agree. I think he'll probably keep playing in some capacity. He played mixed doubles with his daughter, for instance. So maybe that's something he wants to pursue for fun. Maybe do the mixed route with his daughter, and maybe as his other kids go older, there could be something there. Or God, it'd be super unfair if it was like a mixed team of Gushue, his daughter, Mark Nichols, and his wife, or something like.
Yeah.
And you're showing up at the mixed nationals, like what? So like there could be something there that he wants to do, but he could. You're right. He could play at this level again. It's just the logistics of what this team is and how they can play, because it's pretty clear that Brickland is moving from Newfoundland, from St. John's. He is going to go west, and he is not from Newfoundland, so he doesn't have birthright there. So there's going to be a question about that. But of course, those rules could very easily change in the interim as well.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems to be resolved that they're not going to play together next year. And that game against Great Britain, the last game of the round robin, there was that tension. And I think part of it was them sitting there being like, why are we playing right now? Like, the game didn't really matter for them. Mattered a little bit for Great Britain that they had the chance to still finish in first place, but they just wanted to play in the playoffs. Like they were kind of done. And Gallant was bad in that game, right? Through 64%. And I think that's a generous 64% from the scorers. And you saw that back and forth, that the communication wasn't great. And I know I went to bed was that Thursday night after that game, and I thought, like, tomorrow morning might not be good. This could be really bad. And then I wake up in the morning, they're playing great. Like, they're not playing top what we see from them, but they're playing really good. It's a really good version of this team. And we get to the 10th end, he's got the hammer down one, and Scott, that shot that he tries to play a run back double to score 2 against Niklas Edin. Could have potentially drawn for 1, gone to the extra. I liked the call, and I think Gushue said afterwards, he said, I think I might make that shot 1 out of every 5 times or 1 out of every 10 times. That's still a better chance than stealing against Niklas Edin in an extra end if you're going to make that shot 10%. I liked it in the moment. Of course, it would have been nicer if he had made it for him in the team, but I thought that was the right call to go for the 2 in that moment. But what did you think? And when we're talking about overall, like the difference in the sport, we'll talk about Rachel Homan in a minute, but people talk about how small the differences in games are. I think that's a great example, because he missed that shot by millimeter, centimeter.
And the thing is, he even had the chance to make that shot for 1, right? Just instead of making the double, just roll a bit in and you'll get your 1. So it was a missed sweeping call that caught them on that. But I think that's the way to go. Like you said, the percentages play out better in your favor to try that than to try to steal against Niklas Edin in an extra end. That's sort of what we saw in the gold medal game, right? That it's hard to steal in the extra. I have no problem with that choice there. And it sort of epitomized that whole game for Canada. They missed shots by like literally 1 or 2 millimeters, right? That the whole game, they were just the wrong side on a run back, or just an over curl on a freeze attempt. Like it just wasn't as perfect as it needed to be against a team as talented as that Swedish team.
So on the other side of that bracket, it is the Americans who lose to Great Britain in another very exciting semifinal. Actually, the semifinals overall, both on the men's and women's side, were better than the medal games. You got to say. All credit to John Schuster and his team. I think coming into this field, not a lot of people gave them a chance, including us. You're looking at Switzerland as probably that 4th place team. I know we were pretty bullish on Italy coming into this on the men's side. Even Norway coming in with I thought a chance to win some games, and then Glukov was certainly a dark horse and somebody you had to look at after the World Championship last year. But John Schuster comes in, they play well, they get to the 5 wins. Only the 4 teams are above 500 in this field. There's a little more of a beating each other up than I thought it would have been. You didn't see the segmentation that I thought you might, but they get in. And so full credit to them to get back into the playoffs after what I would say is probably a disappointing quad for them, and to come back. To me, that validated the gold medal more than anything they could have done in the interim, was come back and get to the playoffs, play well, show that you still can compete at this level. And I thought it was a very good week for the Americans.
Oh yeah, big time. not that, they needed to validate that gold medal. They'll always have that. That's in their back pocket. But yeah, the showing that they had this past week makes it such that we don't look back and say, Marku Usopavlniemi, who? Like, it sort of cements them and their legacy. You're right. I think the quad was not as successful as they might have liked Grand Slam wise. They did make the playoffs in one. I don't think they won one. Yeah, this team, like, they showed that they can go out and compete with anybody, which is, I think, something that we were questioning, whether they could compete with that top three, right? We knew that the rest of the field, sure, they can beat anyone on any given day. They had beaten Niklas Edin on any given day in the gold medal game before in 2018. So this was sort of, yeah, we can still hang, guys. Yeah.
Good job by them. I mentioned some of the other teams on the men's side. Like I said, very disappointing week for ROC. Everyone else, Norway, Denmark, competitive games. I thought the Chinese put up more of a fight than I thought they would in those games, especially given that they were kind of thrown together last minute. No international experience for the skip. So a good job by the Chinese side. There was a great story too. The third for China. He was at an event, and Mike Harris told just an amazing story that this guy is kind of a unique fellow and has his own strategies. And he was in the hotel at like 6 a.m. and he heard this. Mike Harris heard this beeping sound, thought it was a fire alarm, called the front desk and said, "Hey, like, I think smoke alarm or something's going off." And the front desk called him back 5 minutes later and said, "No, we think you should just go out and see what that is." And the third for the Chinese team had set up the sensors that you put from like back line to hog line that some teams have to track how fast you're kicking out on the ice. And he set it up in the hallway and was walking it to get his speed right. And was just walking back and forth in the hotel at 6 o'clock in the morning, trying to get his speed that way. So kind of a cool story. And that Chinese side, if they decide that that's the team they want to send either to the Worlds or looking ahead, they're not going to the Worlds, but looking ahead next year, maybe this could be the start of something for Chinese men's curling, which has been lacking for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. They had a much better week than I thought.
Yeah. So good times there on the men's side. Scott, let's wrap it up. We didn't really talk about mixed doubles a lot on the show, but very exciting that Italy comes through, wins the gold medal. Amos Massaner and Stephanie Constantini, they run through the field. They do not lose a game. They get the gold. How big of a deal do you think that was for the sport in general?
I think that's a huge deal, Sean. That Italy is hosting the next Winter Olympics. They're going to have teams in all the disciplines there. For them to sweep it is very impressive, given the variability of what can happen in mixed doubles. They just made everything. Like Stefania, especially, just like putting the perfect freezes at the right time. Amos Massaner was there to clean things up when he had to. There was a couple really close games that could have gone either way. One of them was to Team Canada on the last draw, but overall, like, they were just dominant.
Yeah, they didn't give an inch to anybody, and it was very impressive to watch over the course of the week.
And Sean, I believe I said on our preview that look out for them. I obviously didn't pick them, but look out for them. And I saw that this website I sometimes use to wager money on this. I think they were 36-1. They were the longest odds in the field. And boy, I should have placed a shekel or two on them. Damn.
Yeah, but you did not.
I did not.
No. So they beat Norway in the final. Congratulations to Kristen Skazlian and Magnus Nedgraten for the silver medal. Great performance for Norway. First medal, I believe, Scott, right? Since Ulsrud in 2010 for Norway. Would be my guess. First Olympic medal for the country in curling. So good job by them. And Sweden gets the bronze medal. It is, of course, Almeida Deval and Oscar Eriksson beating Bruce Mouat and Jennifer Dodds in that bronze medal game. So Oscar Eriksson leaves Beijing with 2 medals. to his name, the only individual to do that this year. That was one of our 10 burning questions going into the Olympics, Scott. Was somebody would somebody be a double medalist? I believe you said yes. Double gold medals we thought maybe possible, but didn't come through. Amos Mosaner really struggled during the men's side of it, and even though Oscar Eriksson and Bruce Mouat didn't, it does lead to the question of what is the letdown after achieving that height and having to reset. Whereas if you're Mouat and Eriksson, you could maybe make an argument, okay, we didn't achieve our goal, and all right, now we got to reset because now we only have one chance left. Whereas Mosaner is like, I'm getting into the good club in the village, like the gold medalist club. Like I'm hanging out, I'm doing my thing. I can do whatever I want. I'm Amos Mosaner. I own the Olympic Village now. What up? I'm sure that's not what he was doing, but like you just wonder about what the psychology is of you just won a gold medal, and then 36 hours later you got to go compete again. That in a sport where that's not typical, right? The skiers can do it, sure, because that's typical. That's what skiing is. You go do the slalom, then you go do the giant slalom. But in curling, that's not that. You go to your event and then you have some time to decompress after a big event. So I'm curious about what the psychology of it. I don't know if this will affect Canada's rules at all in terms of should people be eligible to do both. I would argue that no, they shouldn't be. But I don't know. Any takeaway on that of these individuals who participated in both?
No, I like you said, we saw Oscar Eriksson come back, play really well. Bruce Mouat also played well coming out of it. That there's probably some truth to it that, holy cow, I reached this amazing high that probably they didn't think they were going to. I think they even said that they were surprised to be 9-0, as was everybody. But there's got to be some kind of a letdown, right? That's why I sort of agree with you. I don't think that as a rule they should play both disciplines, because there is the chance for that letdown that we did see from Amos Mosaner. Great job winning the gold medal, but then how do you get up again? It's pretty tough.
And so he certainly struggled, but as you said, both he and Constantini will be in the field at the games in 2026. Constantini presumably still skipping the women's team, and we'll see what Joel Reiternaz decides to do on the men's side, and presumably too they'll be back to defend that gold medal once we get to 2026. Elsewhere on the mixed double side, very exciting for Australia. Talia Gill, Dean Hewitt, they get the country's first wins at the Olympic Games, one of which at the expense of Canada. Canada, just dishing out wins in the last couple of Olympics to some teams, but great win for them. It was pretty cool. John Morris, of course, has coached that team in the past, coached them at the Olympic qualifying event, and so that was a cool moment that they got to play against each other. Surprising that they got to play against each other. One of the big questions was, Scott, would everybody get to play? Nobody tested positive in advance of the event, but Talia Gill tested positive during the event. But then I still don't have the entire sequence of events in terms of exactly what happened, but I went to bed. Australia had been pulled out of the event. They were going home. I woke up. They had just beaten Canada, and I was very confused. But it's good that it wasn't an outbreak at the games and that Talia Gill was okay. Just a very bizarre scenario there for Australia, but it was cool to see another country represented in the Olympic Games and getting some wins.
Yeah, and they didn't have any wins before that. And Sean, I'll correct you real quick. It's Talia Gill, not Talia. But they didn't have any wins before this COVID news came down. And so you thought, okay, well, if they have to forfeit their last two games, at least nobody's suffering because they had to lose a game early in the competition that then another team gets a free win later on. That was my thoughts going into it. But it was the same as you, Sean. I woke up and was legit confused why there was a line score to either of the games, because the second game was going on at the time I woke up. I don't know what it's like. We talked about the psychology of the letdown. What's the psychology of waking up and thinking, oh, we don't have to play this team because they're disqualified. So let's just kick back. You sort of get out of your game mode, and then a couple hours later, actually no, you do have to play them in like an hour. Get to the rink, right? Like that's really hard, and especially for a team that they think they're out, they come back. What do we have to lose? Let's just go. Let's just give them all we got, and they did, and they won their last 2 games. Great to see an emerging curling nation get to the Olympics and get wins, but it's a really tough position for those teams that had to play Australia on the last day.
Yeah, so it was Canada, of course, and then Switzerland, and really tough week for Jenny Pram, Martin Rios. For them, only going 3-6, so disappointing week for sure. And yeah, the 2 games against Australia, those are the 2 wins at the end of the week. So certainly a tough situation for the Australians and their opponents in that situation. The other new country represented, the Czech Republic, Polova and Paul, they go 4-5. So a very good week for them coming in. So as we look ahead to 2026, the Italians, of course, guaranteed to be in, and it's going to take some work for the other 9 spots and who's going to be there. And we'll have a more traditional qualifying process over 2 years for countries to qualify for the Olympics. So it's going to be tough to crack that field of 10 as we look ahead. So Scott, let's talk about John Morris and Rachel Homan real quick. They, of course, go 5-4, lose on the head-to-head against Sweden to make the playoffs. Tough week for them. Never really quite got in sync. There was a lot of talk about the communication. I'm not overly concerned about the communication between the 2 of them. They know each other well enough, and I didn't think that was an issue. The only thing I would say, though, is I would take some slight issue with this narrative or this idea that they missed the playoffs by a millimeter or a centimeter. Certainly in the last game, they lost on a measurement, like against Italy. Yes, there's no question about that. But that shot wasn't missed by a millimeter or a centimeter. That shot was missed by 8 feet. And the only reason it was close is because there was an Italian stone in its way. And, Rachel Homan had a shot. She had to draw the button, and she was heavy. And they knew that it couldn't come to the backing. And it was heavy pretty much the whole way. And the concern, not the concern, but what was noticeable to me in that moment is that Rachel threw it. John sort of started to sweep. Rachel screaming that he should sweep or calling an aggressive line call. She even goes to make a move to come around to help sweep.
Yeah.
And John says, no, call line. And so she goes back and calls the line. But it's one of those moments where, and Rachel has been very open since that, or not very, like she's talked about it since, that she's had a tough time. The amount of pressure that she felt, probably both externally, which is very real, and probably internally as well, because she always wants to succeed. And we've seen that from her over the course of her career. And in that moment, it looked to me that was kind of a panicked Rachel Homan after she let that stone go. And she kicked too strong, and she overcalled the sweep. And it was tough to watch. And she was certainly emotional afterwards. And her and John Morris sort of with his arm around her and saying, like, I'm here, like, it's us, we're a team. It was very powerful. And for as much as you've seen disappointment to anger at the decision that was made to have them there or at the performance itself, the 2 of them standing there in front of Colleen Jones, just absolutely gutted like that. It's a powerful moment, and it makes me wonder a little bit about what expectations do we put on these players. And she missed a shot at the end of a game. Like, so what? I do that every week, like, and I know it's not the same, and we can't equate what we do when we play with athletes at the highest level, both in terms of the expectation on them from forces like Curling Canada and what they put on themselves. But nobody should be in a position, or you don't want somebody to be in a position where they're talking about, it being that difficult and talking about being in like a black hole after losing a sporting event. And when I look back at that shot, and I've watched it since Rachel Homan has posted about how difficult a time she's having, that's what I see in that shot, is somebody who went through that in 2018, doesn't want to go through it again in 2022. And honestly, it kind of took away some of the enjoyment of the rest of the games for me a little bit, that this is what can happen to the players when overall it's a stupid sport. It's a stupid game. It's 40-pound rocks on ice. It shouldn't be that crushing. And Curling Geek tweeted that he feels as though maybe the Olympics has taken away more than it's given the sport. I think that might be true in Canada. I don't know about the rest of the world, but I don't know. Rachel Homan might be the epitome of that right now for me. And that there's a movement, and people are sending letters via the Ottawa Curling Club that will get to Rachel. And just know that I know for me, being a 2-time Olympian should be something that brings a lot of pride and a lot of joy to her and her family, because that is a remarkable achievement in any sport, let alone curling in Canada, being able to do it twice. And at her age too, right? Like, she still has more cycles if she wants. So I don't know, Scott, that's sort of my monologue about it.
It's tough because as a Canadian, the pressure to perform in curling is there, given the history that our nation has with the sport, right? Canada has been the best curling nation since world championships were formed. Scotland invented the game. They say Canada perfected it, right? So there's going to be pressure just from the weight of history on your shoulders when you look back at the Olympians who came before, winning medals every time. We hadn't missed a medal in curling at all until 2018. And for it to happen to both the men's and women's team at the same time was pretty hard, I'd say, for the curling public here in Canada to accept, especially a lot of the casual curling public who hop on for these Olympics and think, hey, what's different? Like, we won double gold in 2014. How are we missing the playoffs? So understanding the way that you and I do, how much the other countries have improved, mostly at the top, not at the breadth of curling in other countries, but the top level teams are playing every week in Canada in Grand Slams, are just as good, if not better, than almost every team that we have. So I think I was thinking of this watching the bobsled, Sean, on Sunday morning, thinking if Canada could put 4 teams in to the curling tournament, the way that the German bobsledders have 3 or 4 teams, it increases your chances for sure, because I guarantee that our third best team is going to be just as good as most of the countries in the field. It's just not the way that the game works, and that's fine. But it's something that you can't take it personally unless you're the one that wants to go and represent Canada, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you're not going to get better at curling and go do it,
no,
then whatever. Just relax.
Yeah. It's a sport. These people are out there pursuing their dreams. They're trying their best. Like, they're not trying to lose games. They're out there, and you know what? The other people are good. Like that, we have to remember that I heard this a lot when I worked for the Blue Jays, and people would boo when the game was going poorly, and people would say, well, if I went to the theater and I was watching a show, if I went to the Phantom of the Opera and the show was bad, I would be right to boo. I'd be like, yeah, but if you go to the Phantom of the Opera, there's not somebody who's getting paid $1 million to try to interfere with the guy playing the Phantom to do his job. Yeah. Like, there's people who are actively trying to interfere with your ability to succeed in sports. And, I think the majority of curling fans are good and positive and send positive vibes to them. But yeah, it's that vocal minority that is unfortunate that we see. And you're right. If it was an event where, say, the top 10 teams in the world qualified, Canada would win a lot of medals in that. in all three disciplines, and more so probably mostly in the men's, then probably the mixed doubles, then the women's, probably in that order. But it doesn't work that way, and thank God it doesn't. Because then they'd have to start the curling thing in January if you wanted to set up those teams there. And if part of it too is Canada not winning medals, 2 medals in the last 2 Olympics, right? Sweden won 3 in this Olympics. But if part of that is making it more interesting for Canadian fans potentially, that it's not a given that Canada's going to win, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because you can watch with some intrigue. It's not like in 98 where it's just how many points is Schmerler going to win by. It's not, is she going to win? It's just by how much is she going to win in a lot of the games. I think that's a good thing. And the overall health of the sport, that more countries being competitive, giving examples to kids in other countries that they can watch on TV, maybe makes them want to go try the sport, gets their family out to try the sport. Hopefully that will continue to go, right? The World Curling Federation has a lot more member associations today than it did in 1998. There are more curlers worldwide today than there were in 1998. It's contracting in Canada, which isn't great. But internationally, the sport is healthier than it has been in a long time. So I don't know what the answer is other than be nice to the athletes because they're trying their best.
Yeah. And but at the same time, Sean, you can't score 5 points in a game and lose. That's
it was a bad loss. And Jennifer Jones said that. She's like, bad loss.
Yeah. So, I'm just trying to square away what I said at the beginning of the podcast with what I'm saying now, that you can still criticize, but attacking people personally, there's no place in the game for that.
Yeah. There's space for, considered analysis of what is happening on the ice. There's not room or space for attacks, personal attacks.
That's right.
Boom. All right. So there you have it. Anything else from Beijing 2022, Scott?
I'm sure some stuff will come to mind, but we're going to talk more down the road about different events. And so if something comes up that I think of, maybe I'll hop on the old Twitter machine or whatnot. But that's all I can think of for now. It was fun. It's now over. I listened to podcasts today from 2 weeks ago that I just hadn't listened to because curling was always on. So we're catching up.
Yeah, things are chugging along here, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of discussion over the next few months. Calls for a curling summit in Canada, and when do we do the trials? There's certainly a lot of stuff domestically that we can talk about, but also internationally. It'd be fun to follow along with what's going on in Italy after this. What is the follow up in Scotland, Sweden, and just sort of what is the aftershoot of that, and even in Australia, where word of a dedicated facility, if they had made the Olympics, was discussed. So we'll see if that comes through. So there's a lot to follow off of the events in Beijing, but that'll do it for today. So thank you so much, everybody, for listening. If you have not yet, please do subscribe to the show, because we still got a lot to go in this season. We still got a Brier, we still got Paralympics, we got 2 World Championships, we still got 2 slams, and then we have 95% of the teams in Canada, at least, breaking up and finding new people to play with. So a lot to talk about. So do subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Do likes, ratings, comments, all that fun stuff. Helps other people find the show, keeps us growing. You can also follow along at Game of Stones Pod on Twitter and Instagram, Game of Stones Podcast on Facebook, and head on over to GameofStonesPod.com, where you can find all of our past episodes. Plus, the merch is available under the merch tab. All proceeds to the Sandra Schmerler Foundation and Food Banks Canada, which we match. So we send those off at the end of every month. And of course, if you want to let us know what you want to hear on the show, Game of Stones Podcast at gmail.com. And Jerry, I appreciate that you agree with me on the color of the handles. That actually made me feel very validated. I thought I was the only one who cared. So thank you for that. So Scott, that's it for the Olympics. How much of a break are you going to take before you feel like you want to watch a game? Like, are you going to watch any of the Scottish or the Swiss championships?
Probably next weekend if I'm up early. I'll put some on YouTube while I putter around in here. That's but dedicated sitting down just watching. Yeah, probably not.
Yeah, take a bit of a break, and yeah, that's good. Those Swiss and Scottish championships, you're right. That'll be good as like background, pay attention. Certainly in the playoffs, championships, it'll be fun to watch. And good luck to all those participants. And we will be back next week talking Briar Paralympics, getting you all set for the next round of big time curling action. But until then, keep those brooms on the ice and don't dump that intern.